Good afternoon, subscribers, and you join me today in my workplace. And how appropriate, therefore, that during today's Year 13 Labour Markets lesson, we have been considering the whole notion of the individual supply curve for labour. How much an individual is willing to supply into the labour market, and more specifically, why they're willing to supply labour into the labour market. So I'm sure you may already be familiar. This is a very common diagram, this backward bending supply curve of labour for the individual. And we just want to break this down this afternoon and to talk a little bit more about it. And I'm going to say just one or two things before we get stuck into the actual analysis of the diagram, and that is to just point out a few assumptions to you. Number one, we're assuming that as an individual, we either engage in one of two activities. We're either at work or we are enjoying leisure time. If you're at work, you're earning a wage, and so the opportunity cost is the leisure time that you're giving up. If, on the other hand, you're enjoying leisure time, then the opportunity cost is the wage that you're sacrificing, because the alternative was that you would go to work and you would earn a wage. So we're considering this trade-off between leisure and work. Secondly, this model also really assumes that the only reason people go to work is because they wish to earn an income. Now, of course, you might be thinking to yourself, well, of course that's true, but when you get into the workplace, you'll find, actually, ladies and gentlemen, that there are other reasons why you may wish to go into the workplace. So, number one, it may be a great place for you to mix with people and enjoy some social time with them. So that's a possibility. It may be that there are other certain benefits which your employer provides you with, which, as a consequence of which, you enjoy going to work. So if you're given, say, free gym membership or something like that alongside of your job, that encourages you to get into work rather than simply go in because you want to earn a wage. And ladies and gentlemen, if you want to work for 40 years and the only thing that you're interested in is your wage, you're probably not going to enjoy your job very much. Thirdly, this model assumes that jobs are flexible. Now, of course, especially nowadays, the extent to which jobs are flexible is actually rather limited, especially if you consider salaried workers, so people who are paid a fixed amount per month. Well, they cannot necessarily just up and down with regard to the number of hours worked, because their job is just not flexible in that regard. And so I've also mentioned that flexibility and the job being hourly paid rather than salaried. Okay, so let's get into this and let's just explain the basic premise behind it, because even in this most basic form it is quite useful. So we're assuming that the individual supply curve of labour is backward bending, so it goes from A to B to C. And why is that? Well, we are assuming that as the wage rises, that incentivizes people to work more. In other words, they're going to consume more work and they're going to have less leisure time. So there's a trade-off there between working more hours, earning additional income, but obviously the trade-off is that you've got less leisure time. So what we could say in that instance is that there is a substitution effect happening, whereby people are substituting work for leisure. And of course, many of you, when you leave university and you're young and you're ambitious and you're driven, well, you may be more than willing to give up your leisure time to pursue a career. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you'll be very ambitious and you'll want to work long hours because you will see the potential for climbing the career ladder, as it were. So you will substitute work for leisure. So that's very positive in terms of the number of hours that you go into work. Now, alongside of that, of course, there is an income effect. And that income effect will also encourage you to work longer hours, because as you're working longer hours, you will therefore be earning more money. And so that positive income effect will also provide you with an incentive to work. So these income substitution effects will be reinforcing one another and encouraging you to work longer and have less leisure time. Now, some people really love their jobs. I really love my job. And some people maybe don't get the balance quite right, and so they then find that they just want to work all the time. And in these days of online and social media and all that jazz, it's much easier to just work. And so you might find that you go from A to B, and actually you just keep within the constraints of 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Well, you might actually be willing to move from A to B to D. And you're willing to just work, no leisure time, because it's in the pursuit of, maybe you're starting your own business, you're running your own business, and you're just having to work all the hours in order to make it successful. And you could class that sort of person, A, B, and moving on to D. You could say that they're a workaholic because they're just willing to work at the cost of everything else in their lives. But for most people, there comes a point in time where you might say to yourself, oh, well, I'm working all of this time, but actually, now that I'm earning a little bit more money, so my wage has gone up, so we're moving up this, of course, all the time, up the ladder, as it were. So now that I'm earning more, I can maybe not go to D, but actually, I'm going to go A to B and then flip around to C. Because I find that I can work maybe fewer hours, but because the wage at C is much higher than it was at B, I could potentially be earning the same amount of money, and consequently earn the same amount of money, but have a better, as that old phrase which is bandied around quite a lot at the moment, I could have a better work-life balance in that respect. Now again, there are two effects going on here. We have the substitution effect and we have the income effect. Now the normal case is that higher wages, as wages go up, that encourages you to work more. So it's still very positive in terms of working longer hours. However, the income effect, if the income effect is very strong, because you're earning a higher wage, which means that you can work fewer hours, then as a consequence of that, the income effect will start to outweigh that substitution effect as substituting work for leisure. And so instead of substituting work for leisure, when the wage starts to get higher, you'll start working a bit less and have more leisure time. And that's because that very powerful income effect is coming into play, whereby you can enjoy the same standard of living as you maybe once did, working quite a number of hours. You can cut your hours, still have that same standard of living, but work fewer hours, have a better work-life balance. And so that's the whole theory and concept behind this particular backward bending supply curve. Now, of course, as I've mentioned here, we don't all, for example, work, say, 37.5 hours a week. So salaried employees, such as myself, such as teachers, you're given a monthly salary, and you then have to work whatever hours are necessary in order to fulfill the requirements of your particular job. So it's not necessarily the case that every worker is able to just say, oh right, well my wage has gone up, let me just now take my foot off the gas in terms of worker hours and let's start working a little bit less. That's not necessarily the case. But we can see how this might be the case for some individuals. And that's really all that this is getting at. So that's all I have to say on this one, ladies and gentlemen. Bye for now.